Welcome to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. Well, it's time to check back in with Canada's Arctic, a region of great opportunity, but also some great challenges as well. Our guest today is Madeleine Redfern. She is a former mayor of Iqaluit, the capital of Nunavut. She's also now president of the Ajungi Consulting Group and co-chair of the Gordon Monk Arctic Security Program. Welcome to Boom and Bust.
Thank you.
So Madeleine, there's obviously a lot to talk about here, but I'd love to get your opinion on what is the state of Canada's Arctic right now?
Well, it's, I guess, in different sort of states, depending on, what part of the Arctic that you're talking about. And Canada's Arctic is huge. Nunavut alone is 20% of the Canada's landmass. So between the three territories and the northern parts of the provinces, we represent a lot of landmass, a lot of Canada's coastline. And while we are sparsely populated, it's very different from Yukon and NWT, where there's road access, fiber optics, telecommunications, lower cost of living as a result, easier for economic development. It is definitely, much harder for the parts of the Arctic where we don't have roads and we don't have good telecommunications, and the cost of living as a result is significantly higher. It's harder to do business. We're 100% diesel dependent in Nunavut, but again, there are parts of northern provinces that are in very similar situations as us in Nunavut.
So what do you see as, and I recognize that it is different depending upon where you're located and what the infrastructure, and we are going to talk about infrastructure in just a second, but what do you see as the potential opportunities? Let's put it that way.
Well, we've seen in other Arctic nations where those countries have recognized the value and the need to invest in their Arctic regions. And so recently at a Arctic 360 conference, we heard the Swedish ambassador to Canada say that once they began to invest in their Arctic, they began to see tremendous economic returns. Everything from new data centers, telecommunications infrastructures, building universities, Tromsø becoming a world-renowned marine university where people from around the globe want to go there. So there are definitely other countries that have made significant investments, and they're seeing great economic returns as a result. Greenland, Alaska, the Nordic countries, and we also see Russia making significant investments in their Arctic as well.
Interesting. Wow, that's the neighborhood, absolutely. So tell us a little bit, again, it depends on the area, I get that, but to tell us a little bit about what the infrastructure's like now. Let's say transportation, let's start with that.
Well, in Nunavut and other parts of northern Canada, where there is no roads, we're 100% dependent either on air travel, especially for moving people around. In the winter months, we are looking at flying in all our non-perishable foods, so milk, dairy products, bread, meats, fruits, vegetables. And very short shipping seasons, where that is when we usually are able to bring up our construction materials, our non-perishable goods, office equipment, furniture. So it does make it a bit of a challenge. And when you're wanting to do big projects like build a house or an office complex, it usually takes at least 2 years of the planning process. And you need to have everything from your financing in place months ahead, secure your goods, books your ship, and so that the goods are going to come up sometime, if you're lucky, between July and early October. And then you've got, to try to build in that time frame when some of it is construction that happens at -40, -50. It's tough.
Right.
And COVID has only made it harder. Definitely harder, and because we're competing with lots of other jurisdictions who are also under, construction booms and trying to build housing and such.
We're going to continue our discussion with Madeleine Redfern. She is the former mayor of Iqaluit in Nunavut territory. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Madeleine Redfern. She is president of the Ajungi Consulting Group, former mayor of Iqaluit. Madeleine, we were talking about various infrastructure in the Arctic right now. I'd love to get your sense about, I think you did mention this, connectivity, online infrastructure. What's it like right now?
Well, a lot of our northern communities are satellite dependent, especially if we don't have the benefit of a road and the fiber optic, which means that it can be a real challenge to do what most Canadians who are in the South enjoy. So there are times where it's impossible to sign into online banking, very difficult to use the Government of Canada portals, for online applications. Sometimes when the satellite completely goes down and you're, at the grocery store or at the bank or trying to buy gas, you simply can't pay for the services or the goods that you're trying to buy. It also makes it really difficult for, at times, even we've had the RCMP just several months ago repeatedly informing our residents in our communities that if they needed the assistance of the police for, any service, that people had to go physically to the detachment and ask the police for help. Now, if you're dealing with a domestic violence situation or any other life-threatening emergency, I mean, you are not usually able to literally walk out the door and drive or walk, however far it is to the detachment. So it is, a public health safety issue when people can't get something as basic service as being able to use your telephone, text, call, internet. It's not, a good situation to be in.
Thanks for sharing that example with us. I think it's quite an important one. I'd like to broaden it out just a bit, since you do play a role as co-chair of the Gordon Monk Arctic Security Program. I'd love to get your sense about Arctic security issues, the Russians, the Chinese. It seems to be an area of increased interest by these other countries. Can you tell us a little bit about what you know about that?
Well, first of all, the Gordon Monk Foundation a few years ago did a survey of both Northerners and Southern Canadians about what their perceptions were of Arctic security. And what was interesting about that survey was that the views of both Northerners and Southerners were pretty much aligned. They were concerned about environmental security, human security, and without a doubt, military security as well. And since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there's been a greater awareness that about global security in general. Everything from supply chains and our dependence on other countries for oil and gas, but also that Russia is an Arctic state, and there have been tremendous investments by Russia in its Arctic regions, and including in areas which are both civil and military investments. There's concerns also with China, especially around some of their long-term economic and geopolitical interests. And so they've been strategic in looking at where they can invest in raw minerals. We saw that they were interested in purchasing, or Shandong, a company that buying out a TMAC, which was a mining company up in the Katimir region. There is, we should be much, much more aware of these potential risks and threats that both Russia and China can pose in different ways. And I think, the military and CSIS, our security folks have been long time explaining, or warning politicians and bureaucrats and Canadians that we should be paying attention and of these risks and threats. Huawei is a Chinese company where it's been shown by our allies, whether in the United Kingdom and elsewhere, that in telecommunications and technology, hardware, software is hardware. And there is, data is the new gold, and it's definitely mining data from other countries, our personal information. It's we need to do a lot more in understanding what those risks are and threats, and protect our national interests and our individual interests, of course.
Thank you for that answer. We're going to take another brief break. We'll be back with our guest after that break. Please stay with us. Madeleine, wanted to talk a little bit about your experiences and your observations of some of the successful innovations and innovative companies in your region. There must be some good news stories there that they're working on or have been successful at.
So the Arctic absolutely poses an opportunity for innovation that is unique to our region. While we're dealing with some struggles and issues, related to climate change and permafrost melting, there are absolutely opportunities for developing, some simple or some complicated technological solutions. So with the pipes that are breaking in our municipality, something as simple as a flexible coupler, so when the pipes and the access vault are moving up and down, the coupler allows the pipe to flex instead of break. So, but interestingly enough, there's also, equally a value and opportunity to put sensors on those pipes and infrastructure, so you can actually monitor what is happening in real time and proactively deal with potential break. Smart Ice is another company that, or sort of, I guess, a social interest venture that is monitoring, what is happening with our ice conditions in our region, working with our local people, building capacity. And again, we're an area that is largely data deficient, and that presents opportunities, mapping out our seabed, developing fiber optic cables into our region, something that I'm involved in with Can-Arctic Inuit Network and our Sedna Link phases 1 and 4. But the phases 2, which is up along the east coast of Baffin Island and Greenland and through the high Arctic and Northwest Passage, there's an opportunity to make it a smart cable. What does smart mean? Smart monitoring and reliable telecommunications, data sensors, so you can figure out what is, baseline data, but real-time data, both that's climate change, environmental protection for marine protected areas, but also for our national security and our intercontinental security, who's going through our waters or what is in our waters.
Right.
Also preventing even something as simple as whale ship strikes, because we know with climate change that whale migration is changing. Fish populations are moving around differently. And increased shipping, we really need to get as much real-time data as possible so that we can do good evidence-based decision making. And it's a multi-user, multi-purpose, multi-benefit infrastructure is definitely something that we need to be investing in. So it's good for civil purposes, commercial purposes, but also our national defense purposes.
Indeed. Wow, very interesting. Are there some Inuit business leaders who are part of this story as well then?
Well, I'm the chief operating officer for Can-Arctic Inuit Networks, and this is a perfect example of Southern and Northern Indigenous economic reconciliation in play. We definitely have Inuit organizations and development corporations who are interested, because it also is an opportunity for us to begin to develop an Arctic blue economy.
Okay.
These sensors need regular annual maintenance, so we can train Inuit to actually be, maintaining those sensors. But there's also the data, that is being, that will come from that. And as I said earlier, data is gold. So being able to analyze that data for the different, purposes is going to be tremendously important for our region, but also for Canada.
Right, and that will in turn help other businesses to be created and succeed.
Absolutely. And some of it is predictable. If we could deal with also the energy issue in the north and get off of diesel, then we can see, the opportunity for data centers. Norway, one of our Norwegian partners, Bulk Infrastructure, the reason why that, they're interested in building a fiber optic cable from Norway into Labrador is to unlock the green opportunity that comes from renewable energy.
Right.
And it's easy, as Peter Narrowboat says, it's a lot easier to move a gigabit of data than a gigawatt of energy. So put the data centers where, the abundant energy source is. And that's often, or can be, in the north. And you can save a lot of money on the energy costs which data centers require. And you can have all the spin-off businesses.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm here with Madeleine Redfern. You're in Iqaluit right now, I'm presuming?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great. She's in Iqaluit and I'm not, but we're having a great conversation, of course, about the future of the Arctic, both economically and infrastructure-wise and so on. You were just finished talking about data centers, very interesting conversation. How easy is it or hard is it for these new companies, these new startups, to get access to capital? Is that a big issue?
It has definitely been an issue, and thankfully, our Inuit organizations were able to secure some Indigenous and Inuit-specific infrastructure funding and investment funding. But we do also need to see that the federal government actually does more than that. Right. So even something as simple as providing Indigenous spectrum, which is a resource. We see that in the United States, where Indigenous spectrum set-asides can help facilitate the development of Indigenous telecommunication companies. It exists in New Zealand as well as in Mexico. But we also need to see, in addition to that, some specific funding for the small, medium enterprise startups, that aren't necessarily the big Indigenous development corporations. There's real value in having the mix of businesses that can fill in the different niches. In addition, we are a society of innovation. We are a society of technology. Our people and our youth and our hunters and are fascinated by all these different opportunities. But in the past, it's been really difficult. When I've tried to sometimes approach some of the funding agencies, it's like, oh, well, climate change funding, they look at it and understand it from a Southern lens point rather than a Northern or an Indigenous sort of, viewpoint. We are going to possibly, almost certainly actually develop technologies and innovation differently. We have the opportunity to create Arctic smart cities. What does that mean? Like, we might use sensors, to allow snow plowing to happen on our runways or on our roads. Our automated unmanned vehicles might be very different than that in the South. But we will think of, what those possibilities are. And it can be a challenge, when the funders or the financiers, they're used to what they understand, and their reality very different than ours.
That's a very good point, and obviously it's a bit of a work in progress there. We talked a little bit about the environment. We've got a couple of minutes left. How are environmental responsibilities taken into account as these businesses develop?
Well, for the larger projects, we have a number of what's called institutes of public government. So, such as the Nunavut Impact Review Board, the Nunavut Planning Commission, just to name a few.
Right.
So, what is good is that these are co-management boards. So, where there is Indigenous representation on them. But also, too, is that with there's a requirement under our modern day treaty to ensure that there is good, meaningful consultation. And ideally, that there are impact benefit agreements that are negotiated with our communities and our people, so that people are participating in these projects. They have opportunities for training and jobs and contracts, so that we benefit from these projects and developments, unlike what was happening 20, 30 years ago, or even before then.
And what do you see? We've got about 45 seconds left. What do you see on the horizon? Are you optimistic about the future of the region?
There is lots of opportunity, and I think that we've missed out on quite a number of them in the last 20 years. So we recognize that we must, act, and if we don't, we will continue to be left out literally in the cold, and that we have a really large young population that is coming up. 10,000 new adults in the next 10 years.
Wow.
We need to get smart and strategic so that these children, these young new adults, have opportunity for education, training, and jobs, and so that they can buy their own homes, build them, and we live in a prosperous Arctic region instead of one, that ends up being an Arctic ghetto.
Indeed, indeed. Madeleine Redfern, thanks so much for joining us today. Really interesting chat, and I wish you every success.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for joining us again today. We'll be again on your TV screen in the future. Please join us again. Thank you.